कृपा सिंधुभ्य एव च पतितनां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः. So we had a little bit of a technical glitch. Our first speaker is unable to join, so we were trying to also help him join using another computer. So this caused us a few minutes delay. But let us begin this session by chanting Srila Prabhupada's Pranam Mantra and taking his blessings. And then we'll also hear from Srila Prabhupada. And hopefully by that time, our next speaker will be online. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami iti namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschat Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna. So we'll begin this session once again by hearing from His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada.
So the Upanishad teaches us that we should be very careful. We should not be very much advanced. We may be advanced, that doesn't matter. We don't say that you don't advance in material education. You advance. But at the same time, you become Krishna conscious. That is our proposal. We don't say that you do not manufacture motor car or do not manufacture these so many machines. We don't say. But we say, all right, you have manufactured this machine, employ it in Krishna's service. That is our proposal. We don't say stop it. We don't say that you don't have any sex life. But we say, yes, you have sex life for Krishna. You produce Krishna conscious children. 100 times you have sex life. But don't create cats and dogs. That is our proposal. So, education required, but if education is wrongly diverted, it is very, very dangerous. That is the purpose of this book. Andhang tama pravishanti jiva vidyam pasate tato bhuya ivate tamo jau vidyayang rata. So-called education has no value. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Well, it is said in many a times in scriptures that by simply taking shelter of the devotees of Krishna, all the problems of life can be solved. And we just had that proved in real life. As soon as we started hearing from Srila Prabhupada, Deen Dayal Prabhu could magically, all systems came on board. So Deen Dayal Prabhu, I'm so happy to see you. I must tell you, I've probably not drawn as much happiness in a spurt of few seconds like I'm doing so now by having your darshan. It's such a pleasure to see you. Please accept my humble obeisances. So dear devotees, Deen Dayal Prabhu has spent a good 20 years of his life, probably more, in serving ISKCON education at a very, very core role. He has been involved from the early times of the Bhaktivedanta College, has played various roles. Today, we've invited him to speak to us. If you notice, since yesterday evening, we started building on the theme of the symposium, primarily talking about the Brahmanical culture. Then we talked about the system of education in terms of Shastric education. We looked at communities, how to build education within communities, increasing the number of teachers through the teachers training online, the board of teachers. And we also talked about how to establish institutes, right? But just like life, institutes, organizations go through also a life cycle. And if somebody is fortunate enough to be through the life cycle of an institution, they get to learn a lot. And we have with us today Deen Dayal Prabhu, who will share his experiences in the last 20 years in establishing a university, the challenges around it, from theology to business. So let's welcome Deen Dayal Prabhu. I hand over the symposium to you. Prabhu, we have about 20 minutes left, but you can take those 20 minutes and I'll give another additional 5 minutes for question answers, and we'll adjust the schedule as we move along. So the symposium is handed over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. Can you hear me properly?
We can do, if you speak a little bit louder, your voice is soft.
Okay. Usually it's not soft, but as you said, we had some technical issues. So I was changing from the Chromebook, which was working perfectly well, towards laptop. Is it okay now?
We can work with this, Prabhu. Thank you.
Okay. I will speak loudly. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Thank you very much, Tapan Mishra Prabhu. Hopefully this was not too stressful for you, but technical issues, part of the challenge, and today I'm scheduled to speak about the challenges. So quite appropriate, and if things are not working, especially in this tech department, it's a big blow to my false ego because I'm having a background in IT. So I always prefer to be on the side those who are on top of the game in terms of the utilization. So what I have for you, as Tapan Mishra Prabhu was saying, it's about the challenges in an own university education. And I prepared 9 slides for you. And if you don't mind, I would like to move it to there. Not much. And it's all coming from Google Drive. So, dear Vaishnavas, here we are, 1 of 9, not too many, but quite, I guess, quite expressive. So, subtitle of my presentation is From Theology to Business, or From Theology and Business Education, Local Challenges and Global Responses. Indeed, I have already or almost 18 years of experience of being part of ISKCON education in Radhadesh and Bhaktivedanta College. And I will take you from our initial stage when we had only Bhaktivedanta College towards challenges we were going through, towards a school we created based on those challenges called Alfred Ford School of Management, and then back to Bhaktivedanta College. It's quite a journey, and of course, we can say university challenges at the university education. What's there for us? But ultimately, not many ISKCON there are not many ISKCON entities who are running accredited education, and we in Radesh were focused on that. And based on that, we had quite unique challenges. And I'm going to divide my presentation in 3 parts, which can be entitled dramatically. First is romantic period, 2002-2012, 10 years of romance. And I'm going to speak about that period and what was going on there, what kind of challenges we had, and not to keep you on a depressive level, to speak only about the challenges. We are going to speak naturally about the responses, what we did and how we mingled through that difficult, but in the same time, I have to admit, joyful time. Whatever is done with Vaishnavas, that's my realization, and whatever is done for Krishna, for Srila Prabhupada mission, it's also joyful. No matter what kind of challenge is there, it's really pleasant. So that's something which we should keep in mind by hearing from me. Then we, after 10 years of romance and romantic period, we enter into the Great Depression, and that's the education without accreditation. It's quite something, quite a challenging thing, but we went through that, and ultimately the last Antya-lila, which we are living now, is having Radhadesh campus with 2 schools. From almost no education, we have theology and we have the business. We have Bhaktivedanta College and we have Alfred Ford. So it's quite interesting how we went through, and please take it in a light what we heard yesterday from Mata Jurmila about philosophy education. Take this as a case studies. On our business school, we are teaching to the cases, and you can take those 3 slides which are coming as small 3 distinctive cases, and hopefully we can learn something from our experience, hopefully not to enter in the same mistake, or if you can call it mistake, but challenges, and do as much as possible in spreading the glories of Krishna through education. So, challenges. Ultimately, our challenges at Bhaktivedanta College, honestly speaking, started even before 2002. 1997, some of you will recall, Oxford Center for Hindu Studies was established. Shaunaka Rishi Prabhu and devotees there, and they said we have to do something on undergraduate level. Why do we need to do that? We have to be recognized as a serious movement to interact with others, and we would like to be on top of the presentations of Krishna consciousness, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and generally Hinduism in the world and towards the world. So let us work on a direction to streamline, to create certain academics, powerful Vaishnavas who are able to do so. So that's the first challenge before. But when we launched, and I was still not there in 2002, I joined 2004. In 2002, already there were some initial critiques from Eastern devotees. We are not about jnana. You are doing jnana, we are about the bhakti. Of course, I'm just telling you now to see what kind of context was there 19 years ago. So we had initial critiques, but creating the school, what's important, and you can take it from here, is it should be in a local language. We are in Wallonie, in province of Luxembourg, south of Belgium. We are starting British education. English language is not at all welcome in Belgium, neither is welcome in the French culture at all, neither they like it. So we were not able to establish and take advantage of connection with the governmental institutions, support on that level, because we don't teach neither French, neither Flemish, neither German, which is 3rd official language. So that was our challenge, and it's still a challenge till the present day, but we were finding a way how to go around it. Then what we realized, running accredited bachelor is challenging, especially according to the British standard, which is high in demands. So we were seeing that we need much more resources, and we thought about finances, devotees, educated, we need a venue, better space, and so on. And that created certain challenge on staff retention. Number of devotees, which you can see on the picture is taken, I think, 2012, just before Krishna Kshetra Maharaj took sannyas. Number of devotees at the picture is not now full-time at Bhaktivedanta College, because lucky for them and for us, they moved and they are now established in different fields of activities. Some took sannyas as Krishna Kshetra. Rasa Mandala Prabhu is doing his doctorate in UK, and others. Ultimately, that was a challenge, how to keep devotees. And from that initial group, those 2 on the left side, Anupama, Devidas, and myself, we are still at the college. Another challenge we had for theology degree from Lampeter, University of Lampeter, was insufficient number of students. And their education and pre-education to enter the bachelor. So that was something we were struggling with because number of students were coming from different backgrounds. And then we realized, and I guess some of you are also realistic about that, ISKCON is still small society, but society with a big mission. It's small in terms of the number, and those who are going to study on a undergraduate level, they ask what I'm going to do with the bachelor in Vaishnava theology. That was always open question, and we were always looking to answer them what they can do. They can do whatever they want ultimately, because it equips you with so many things in terms of variety of individual qualities and performances. So that was, but that was the question. Devotees are always looking what I'm going to do. Better to do business, and you are guessing where I'm aiming to. And ultimately, what's another challenge is that in that romantic period, we were running the program and project whole operation based on donations. Donations are very welcome, but you have to find a way to make your project, your school sustainable. You cannot count on donations because sooner or later you're going to hit the wall. And that happened, I guess you are now guessing, to us in 2012. But what were the answers on this romantic period? How did we, all those challenges addressing, did we manage to address them? Yes, we did. This that you can see there is, we were having first building and offices in 2007, 2010. That was the period, that was great. That was able to stabilize operation, and those places are still in utilization now. It's just across Radhadesh, so that's great. To address lack of students, we were looking towards introducing new and additional educational studies degree, bachelor, to kind of give a pathway for those students who are looking towards teaching in, for instance, at that time, Krishnavanti schools were starting. So that was the way how we were looking towards addressing the issue. And interesting enough, and I would never recommend this to anyone, to start something like a business which is out of educational ground. We were doing prasada distribution in Benelux, Germany, Switzerland, big festivals, but that's not our core activity. So you are starting something very new, and it was really a draining operation, but still we did it, so don't do it. But what we did as a great move in 2010, we started online education. And of course, running till now, and we were starting the second school based on the online basic education. So those were the things for the first 10 years of Romanticism. But then, as I said, we kicked the depression period. Why? We lost accreditation for our bachelor in theology. And I guess this picture you see, that's Manu, our graduate, and rather than Vasil, who yesterday got the son, Dani. His picture and his look really express what's going to happen now. 5 years of hard time, super hard time. We lost accreditation. We don't have any more bachelor. We cannot invite students. And at that time, we had already 30 students. It was a good number, but university from Chester, they said they cannot have us, neither any university, any school which is having under 100 students. And for us, even if we will have a completely free education, I seriously doubt we will be able to get 100 students in a school. So unfortunately, we lost accreditation. We had great quality, always excellent feedback, but we don't have enough numbers. And then, just when we were looking to get another partner for accreditation, what happened? You know, or this 5 years ago, Brexit happened, and gone. We cannot do anything. And on top of everything, in those 5 years, we were looking to repay certain amount of money for the building and offices and the library. So it was very interesting period, but again, conclusion no matter how difficult it is, Krishna helps. So we didn't give up, and somehow we managed to go through. So Krishna, thank you very much. What were our responses in that period? How we managed to move through that?
Сложностей. Итак, что мы из этого все вынесли?
Yes,
У
somebody
нас
said,
был курс по киртону, учителей по йоге, семинар.
in hearing now Russian, is that necessary? Thank you. So what were our responses in that period? We were trying to do as much as possible on-site short courses, yoga, teacher training course, art seminar, and so on. Then we were looking towards Bhaktivedanta College online courses, how to do it more and better. But was the key, which was our saving grace for the future, we were looking towards teaching conscious business to devotees and friends of Krishna. We got to know devotees are maybe not so keen to go towards theology, but everyone is speaking about the business, and devotees are very clear about that. And then we were thinking why, ultimately conclusion is, including myself, not all are Brahmins. Not all of devotees are into the clear Shastic study. But we can offer something in the business field. We don't want to be one more business school. We can bring back the values in business, and that already exists. So we were speaking about the postgraduate education because, as I was saying a second ago, undergraduate education requires so much energy. You have to teach students so much, and if you don't have additional help from the government, it's not possible. But the master level, you already get people who are educated, who are clear what they want to do in life. And then we were seriously considering and developing, even before 2012, we were starting to draft our business plan and making a program. That led us to the third phase starting from 2017. And in that year, we launched our Alfred Ford School of Management, which was response on many years of our mingling around how to move ahead. And those wonderful Vaishnavas you see, all of them are represented here with the legal names. And that's one of the things you can guess immediately. We are having business school run from Radhadesh, but in the same time, we are not having devotional framework. We are not using devotional language, and we are not using spiritual names. Why? Because, as I said, ISKCON is very small. Numbers of devotees, but great mission, are very small. So let us address those who are friends of Krishna, who are sharing the same value, and let us look how can we give them certain direction towards Krishna consciousness, and how can we nourish them even in a business education. So our challenge was how to run two schools from the same place. It started, we have same group of devotees, 6, 7, 8 devotees, plus teachers on one side, another side. We have to do separate brandings, marketing. That's quite amazing operation. Then just to bring you some insight in challenge. Insight in challenge is that we have 1 week residency for MBA. And then non-devotees are coming to Radhadesh. I remember, like yesterday, I was sitting on the terrace of Govinda's, and one Japanese, Mr. Ken, came, and Harinam was going on in Radhadesh. And he was looking completely where I landed. What's this? We were able to kind of help him to go through. But, see the challenges of purely devotional environment for business education. But ultimately, the challenge was how to run and how to present Krishna consciousness in business education. We don't want to have one more business school. That was not the idea. We want to be unique and distinctive, and we want to give and offer to 1,200 business schools in the world something unique. So what's that? What can we offer? What's that challenge, and how do we address it? Ultimately, already in 2012, it was very clear. Business world is looking towards not only for money enterprise. And there are already a number of models which are existing in a business world, and people are speaking in the business world. It's not all about the money. Karma capitalism, exist, people are speaking, they are very aware what's going on, what's going to happen if you do something which is unethical. Truly human leadership, Mr. Bob Chapman and what's this gentleman, Sinek, they are running and they are behind that. People are in the center. Those people are vegetarian. They understand that business is much more than money. So certain values they have, which are very friendly to us. More than money concept, even few books are on that level. Values in life, why do you do your business? They try to integrate business, life values, and run it together. It's not separating. Mr. Albion, professor, purpose before profit. That's another concept which is very clearly visible and notable in the business world. So all those concepts are very connected with us. And we, as a devotees, we can give something more. 3P, people plan, you know that. But then we, meaning Alfred Ford, said we are going to teach conscious leadership, which is for devotees, Krishna consciousness in the business world, bhakti values. But for those who are non-devotees, who are coming as outsiders, coming from the Muslim background, Christian background, we have students like that, then they learn about the conscious leadership. And they agree, life is not only about the money, there is purpose behind, there is a meaning. It's tough, but we want to help at least to diminish that suffering. So from that level, we were able to address the big challenge of Alfred Ford, how to teach something which is unique. And that pretty much brings us to the first slide and the last slide. Then we were going from the initial Bhakti school towards business school, and we are coming back. Business school is there to support Bhakti, to give money, resources, and Bhakti is again their core of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is also giving certain input into the Alfred Ford School of Management. And just want to again to say and underline, no matter what kind of challenges are there, devotees, those who are on the battlefield of service, they are most important. And I'm very much indebted to all of those Vaishnavas seeing on the left and also on the right photo, no matter what they have as a dress, because little by little we move that forward and we are offering certain value to the community of devotees and also non-devotees. So that's the unique, and that's a very privileged position number of us are having, being at Bhaktivedanta College and Alfred Ford. And of course, I'm sure that's the same for your projects. So that's pretty much from me. And if you have any question, comments, I'm more than happy to try to answer. Jai Srila Prabhupada and Guru Parampara.
Thank you, Deen Dayal Prabhu. Many lessons for all of us to draw from what you shared. We are seeing more and more that in the world of ISKCON especially, we have to create projects in such a way that they can be synergistic. In order to support the mission, some other activities have to be done alongside. This morning, we had another speaker who's running a Chatushpati, which is a very Brahminical school giving completely free education. And in his example, he is Shastric education he is giving free, but then he also conducts language courses for which devotees offer donations. So he uses the same infrastructure for two things. And obviously, in your assessment, you have found a model that may sustain. So two schools from the same location, but one purpose, which is to expand bhakti around the world. Very grateful, Prabhu. We do not have questions. There is a one devotee. So we would like you to please post your question. If you like to ask the question directly, please do so briefly and quickly. I'm making you unmute to ask your question directly.
I can give one remark, Tapamisha Prabhu, which can be insightful. What you said, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Interesting enough, we were able to, and that's great, we are able now to attract people who are non-devotees to give certain money for education and appreciate that. So that's very, and even as I mentioned briefly, coming from different religious background, and that's great. If someone coming from Muslim background appreciates Bhakti school run under name Alfred Ford, and they know who Alfred Ford is. So that's very good at how we can kind of move ourselves in a society and touch people. So that's, I would say, for me, great achievement.
Absolutely. I think so. And we have to do everything that we can. We have to utilize our names, our skills, our resources, our contacts, everything to progress this mission and the movement. If that means we have to flash our credentials, sometimes that's needed. What's wrong with that? I mean, Srila Prabhupada approved of that and he wanted us to utilize it, as long as the goal and the methods that we use are with full integrity. Deen Dayal Prabhu, thank you so much. Devotees are seeking your contact details. You can please post them on the chat. In order to be able to maintain the time for the symposium, I'm going to now quickly introduce and invite our next speaker, His Grace Sutapa Prabhu. His Grace Sutapa Prabhu is based in the UK. Sutapa Prabhu is going to talk to us about a very subtle topic, if I may say so. You know, something which is very valuable for educators to comprehend, appreciate, and work on what should be an attitude of the educator. So without further ado, I'm handing over the symposium to you, Sutapa Prabhu. Thank you for joining us.
Hare Krishna, Tapan Mishra Prabhu, and my humble obeisances to all the Vaishnavas. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon. Well, it's afternoon in London, and I'm not sure where you are, but very happy to be here. And yes, as Tapan Mishra Prabhu mentioned, I'll try to share something I feel very passionate about, that I feel has helped me in my humble attempts to educate in Krishna consciousness and communicate Krishna consciousness powerfully, relevantly, and in a way that's really transformative. The topic of today's presentation will be learning to hear the unheard. And I have a little PowerPoint presentation here. It's very, very simple. And I'll try to share this with you. As I speak about this, what I'd like to say is that an immediate comprehension of this, it's actually a very, very simple principle. But I feel that what we're talking about here, if we're able to deeply imbibe within our teaching, it could really take things to another level. And I'll try to share that with you today. Om Jnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namaham Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada traveled the world just like any other preacher who travels the world. Srila Prabhupada was often confronted with many different questions that people had about the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And perhaps one of the most common questions that people asked him, that people ask today, and that I'm sure people will continue to ask for generations to come is, can you see God? A very, very interesting question. But I have to say, more interesting than the question is Srila Prabhupada's answer. Because if you look closely and study the corpus of Srila Prabhupada's recorded works, and not just Srila Prabhupada, the acharyas previous to him, you will see that they answered the same question in many different ways. Can you see God? Prabhupada was asked. Yes, Prabhupada said, I can see God. Can you not see God? God is available for everyone. At other times, Srila Prabhupada, when he was asked, can you see God? Srila Prabhupada said, That is not a good question. What will you get by asking that question? The better question to ask me is, Swamiji, how can I be empowered to see God? Sometimes Srila Prabhupada responded to that question by saying, yes, I've seen God, but if I tell you I've seen God, will you believe me? At other times, Srila Prabhupada reiterated the answer of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who said, don't try and see God, but act in such a way that God will want to see you. How would we respond when we're asked the question, can you see God? Srila Prabhupada replied in many, many different ways. When Srila Prabhupada replied to this question, he was definitely illuminating that there are many layers to understanding the answer to this question. But what Srila Prabhupada was specifically doing is he was hearing the unheard. The question may be, can you see God? But Srila Prabhupada, as a teacher, as a communicator, as a preacher of Krishna consciousness, was able to see beyond the immediate question and understand what was the underlying motive behind this question. And once Srila Prabhupada had been able to perceive that unheard aspect of the question, then he was able to respond appropriately, respond differently, respond in a way that would address the underlying motivations. Oftentimes we hear the voice, but have we heard the needs, the interests, the concerns, the emotions, and the blocks that someone may have, which is not necessarily voiced, which is not necessarily expressed in sound, but which is very, very much part of where they're coming from in their question. Unless we learn to hear the unheard aspects, unless we hear these subtle drivers behind people's queries, number one, we may not be able to address what they're actually looking for. And number two, we may not be able to, not only will we not be able to address the thing that they're looking for, but we may actually make things worse because we're not able to deeply understand what is the solution that they're actually looking for. So what I want to share with you today, and again, it's a very simple principle. Every teacher is taught this, perhaps in lesson 1 or 2, that you need to understand your audience. But from my own observation of my own teaching, and from my humble observation of seeing teaching in our movement, I think that there is a lot of room for improvement in this regard. I want to share a story with you of a famous king whose name was King Saul, and he had a prince. And this king, when he wanted to train his prince to be the next ruler of the kingdom, then what he did is he called the prince and he told the prince, before you become the ruler of the kingdom, what I want you to do is I want you to go away to the forest. I want you to go away to the great Mingli forest. And I want you to stay there for 1 year. And in that 1 year, what I want you to do is listen very, very carefully and then come back to me. So this prince set off for the forest, to the great Mingli forest. And there in the forest, he stood, sat, walked, and absorbed all of the sounds of the forest. And after 1 year, he came back and the king asked him, my dear prince, as you prepare to take up rulership, let me first ask you the question. When you went to the forest and you listened for 1 year, what did you hear? And the prince looked back at the king and said, I heard the cuckoos sing. I heard the leaves rustle. I heard the wind blowing. I heard the crickets chirping. I heard the grass blowing. I heard the bees buzzing. And the king was listening to him, looking unhappy. And he looked straight back at the prince. And he said, I want you to go back to the Mingli forest for 1 more year, because I want you to again listen, because there are many more things that you did not pick up on. The prince was baffled. What more sounds could there be? He heard everything. He described everything, but he went back. And for that next year, the prince was listening carefully, and he heard the same sounds. He couldn't understand what is it he was missing. And then one fine day, it dawned on him. And he opened his ears and he began hearing things that he had never heard before. Inspired, enthused, feeling uplifted, he came back, and the king asked him, now tell me, what did you hear? And he said, I heard the cuckoos chirping. I heard the wind blowing. I heard the grass. I heard the leaves rustling. He mentioned all the same things. And then the king looked at him and said, but did you not hear anything more? And then the prince looked back at him and said, yes, when I listened more carefully, then I began to hear the sound of the flowers opening. I began to hear the sound of the grass drinking up the morning dew. I began to hear the sound of the sun warming the earth. And the king was beaming. And he said, now you have learnt the art of how to hear the unheard. And therefore, you are qualified to be a ruler. This ability to hear the unheard, the king said to him, is a necessary, indispensable element of being a good ruler. You need to hear the hearts of the people. You need to hear their feelings which are uncommunicated. You need to hear the pains that they have not expressed to you. You need to understand the complaints that they may not have verbalized. And when you hear all of these unheard things, then when you speak to them, you can inspire confidence in them in such a way that they will want to hear from you. The king looked at the prince and said, the demise of the state comes when leaders only listen to superficial words and don't deeply penetrate into the souls of the people to hear their true opinions, feelings, and desires. It's a beautiful story, and it's a beautiful principle, because if we actually want to reach people, then we need to be able to hear the unheard. Otherwise, we won't be relevant, we won't be powerful, and we won't be transformative. So much of our teaching is about learning our content. But there's a huge amount of teaching which is learning how to communicate that content and how to package that content and how to deliver that content so it meets the needs, interests, concerns, emotions, and addresses the blocks within people. And how do we hear the unheard? Someone may say, is unheard, is not available to my ears. How will I be able to perceive all of that? And let me share with you some things that may help you as a teacher to learn to hear the unheard. The first thing is converse with your audience. Oftentimes in sessions, we do interactive exercises. And we think the purpose of the interactive exercise is to keep the crowd engaged, to keep them energized. We may think the purpose of the interactive exercise is to help them understand something better within themselves. But let me also share with you that interactive exercises and different techniques that you can engage audiences with, a large part of it is so that you as a teacher or us as preachers can actually understand our audience better. We can hear the unheard, because then when we speak, we will be much more relevant, because we'll understand what's actually really going on in their lives. Not only do we converse with our immediate audience, but we should, as teachers, I feel, converse with people in general. Every teacher should have their fingers on the pulse. Like now I'm here and we're on a retreat. It's the first retreat after a long time. And we're here with 70 devotees over a weekend talking about Saranagati or surrender. And I have to share with you that one of the most important parts of the retreat is prasadam time, when I sit down with the devotees and we just have one-to-one conversations. Because I have to share with you that it is in those conversations over prasadam that I often get 60 or 70% of my inspiration for what I'll speak about. Because in those conversations, I learn about the needs, interests, concerns, feelings, emotions, blocks that people have. For many years, I had the fortune of going out on book distribution. And I feel now that being out there on the streets and really being very close to the human story of what people are going through has helped me to be more relevant as a teacher. We need to converse with people. We need to also converse with other teachers. Other teachers have unearthed so much of the unheard. And therefore, when we ask them, what are your audiences going through? What do you feel are the blocks? What do you feel are the real needs of the devotees? And when we converse together as teachers, then we can enrich each other's understanding and really be more relevant in how we present Shastra. We need to converse with the world. There's a big world out there, and there's so many things that are going on. And the people we speak to are living in that world. And therefore, we need to understand what's going on in the world, because that is so much driving their life trajectory. And so unless we're in tune with that, then we will not be able to really communicate effectively. And we have to also converse with Krishna. As Srila Prabhupada wrote in his beautiful poem, Markime Bhagavat Dharma, he writes that, please Krishna, please, you make my power of speech so that it will be suitable for their understanding. Because without your empowerment, without you making my speech suitable for their understanding, I'm powerless to do it on my own. So we must converse with Krishna. We must have good sadhana and spiritual practices. And we must pray deeply to the Super Soul that when we communicate and when we try to share the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, that we can deeply connect with the hearts and the minds of those who we speak to, so that we can really reach them. And we pray that Krishna inspires us and empowers us to hear the unheard. And so this is really what I wanted to share with you today, that as teachers, we often put a lot of focus on grasping our content. But I feel that there's so much more we can be doing to grasp the unheard elements of what our audiences are going through. And just by making that investment of time, just by being sensitive to hear the unheard, and deeply understand it, our teaching and communication of Krishna consciousness can be so much more relevant, powerful, impactful, and transformative. And with those words, I will conclude, and I will hand over to Tapan Mishra Prabhu to see whether there's anything I need to respond to with regards to this. Hare Krishna.
Well, I'm not taking the handover yet. You're still, so our next question, Prabhu. So you very beautifully describe the need for a teacher to hear and pay attention to the needs and concerns, interests of the students, the participants, etc. The question is, what are the other key elements of the character of a teacher that you think a teacher must else in order to be able to deliver Shastra?
My apologies, Tapan Prabhu. Your last bit of your question, you froze and I missed it. So if you could just repeat it again, sorry. So I would hear the unheard in this case, but I'm not entirely yet.
So the question is, what are, according to you, the essential elements of the character of a teacher? What are the other skills, if I may use for the lack of any other word? What is the attitude? What are the other things that a teacher must have to be able to deliver Shastra?
Okay. Thank you so much. I think one thing is a teacher needs to be flexible. A teacher needs to think on their feet. A teacher needs to be willing and able and empowered to adjust their presentation as may be required. Oftentimes I've been doing a class, and as I said, you have to listen to the people. And I may start with an interactive class, and when I get certain feedback on my feet, I may change my whole presentation, understanding that now I'm hearing the unheard, and there's a whole other thing that I have to address here. So I think a teacher has to always be very fluid, very flexible, very adjustable in order to really meet people. They say in order to take someone somewhere, first you have to meet them where they are. And so I think flexibility in presentation is such a huge aspect of being a teacher. And I think a precursor to being flexible is being humble and realizing that, you know what, as a teacher, I thought I heard everything, but maybe I didn't hear everything. And because I'm hearing more of what I didn't hear, I have to change. So I think there could be many, many more things, but immediately in response to your question with reference to the topic that we're talking about today, I think that a teacher has to be flexible and fluid in presentation, and underpinning that there must be a deep humility that I don't know everything, I haven't heard everything, and my presentation may not be accurate or the most powerful, and I'm ready to adapt.
Humility and submission seem to be very rare and precious commodities in the world, and they're becoming even more rare. The next question, I'm just reading it aloud because I'm not sure whether I can entirely. Conversing. I'm not free from false ego and desires. How can I converse?
Again, I missed you there, but as I understood, you said, I'm not free from ego. How can I converse? Was that the question?
That is all there is, yes. There is a second part to it, but that's what it is. And it's also in the chat, Prabhu, in the Q&A. You can look at it.
Oh, it's in the Q&A. Okay, I see. I think being free from ego it doesn't happen in a day. I don't think one day we're free of ego, one day we have ego, and another day we're free of false ego. Every day we're trying to improve. I'm sure the devotee here who has raised the question definitely has some humility, maybe underrates themselves. Work with what you have. Listen, converse. Sometimes by conversing, even when you don't feel humble, you will become humbled by learning how much people have to share with you. Sometimes we have to go and open ourselves up to dialogues and conversations that other ways we would shy away from. And all of that develops a humility within you. So what I would say is that if someone says, I'm not humble enough to converse, then what I would say is at least begin conversing with whatever humility you can muster up. And through that process, a lot more humility will come because it's a humbling process.
And thank you. And I think one thing that everybody could do in that is to go out on the streets and distribute Srila Prabhupada's books and try to have those conversations out there in the open on the field. And as we've seen, Sutapa Prabhu does every December marathon, he leads from the front. Sutapa Prabhu, it was a very valuable lesson that you shared with us today, very touching and very important point. Today, throughout the day, we are focusing on development of Shastric education, various initiatives we are taking. And while we are going ahead and expanding the notion of more teachers, we would really be focusing very hard also on topics such as this. What must our teachers adopt? As you very rightly described, that we may learn certain skills, but we may then try to apply them mechanically. You know, we learn something in teachers training and we apply it mechanically. It's a good start, but it's not enough. It's not enough, as time tells. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
For
for
taking the time and joining us. And I hope to have your association again soon in our upcoming symposiums. So with thank you to Sutapa Prabhu, we move on to our next topic. We've talked about how we are trying to help set up a system, an expansionary system for Shastric education, coming up with programs such as Study and Teach. We also had a session on how to establish Shastric institutes, learnings, the challenges that one faces. We talked about how to embed Shastric education in your communities. We also talked about teachers training, how this needs to expand. And just now, and in the last two other sessions, we heard about the importance. The last session, Sutapa Prabhu addressed now. Now, the next session that we're bringing in is the importance. When one goes through this process of studying scriptures and practices one's sadhana, swadhyaya, over a period of time, Krishna inspires such sincere souls. And each of our scriptures are alive. They speak to us, they speak to our consciousness, they transform our consciousness. Now, the next speaker that I'd like to invite, who's spent now, beginning from early 80s, and he's performed significant service. He's a scholar, he's an educator, and he's going to speak to us what are the important elements for curriculum development. And he's going to speak to us on a very specific topic, which is study guides, and the importance of how through our journey of learning and absorbing scripture, we must develop when Krishna inspires, when we're ready, we should also create study guides, which can then be shared with others. So I'd like to invite Chandra Prabhu, His Grace Chandra Prabhu, if you may please unmute yourself and also switch on your video. Hare Krishna Prabhu. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Chakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Om Adhyana Timirandasya Dhyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Bhajharine Nishesha Srimadi Paschat Yudeshatarine. I'd like to thank the devotees for the opportunity to speak with you this morning.
Chandra Prabhu,
And,
is it possible that we could have your camera adjusted so that we could have more of you? Could we possibly see, we are able to see only a little part of your face. Is it possible you could lower the camera so that we can see more of you in the frame? Because we are then going to also, yes. Thank you so much. These are being recorded, but it's gone back up. It's gone back up to where it was. You'll have to lower it again, if you can, please, just like you did that. Thank you, Prabhu. So I hand over the symposium to you. Thank you so much.
I thank you all for the opportunity to meet with you. It's especially a privilege to have the opportunity to hear from devotees like-minded. Probably I am unknown to most of you. I try to keep it that way, actually. I prefer to do my service as given to me by my spiritual master, and avoid public speaking or being in the spotlight, just because it's more conducive for my service and remembering Krishna. But upon speaking with Tapan Mishra Prabhu about another project that I'm working on, he said, well, we have this going on in 2 to 3 days. Would you mind speaking about what you're doing? Initially, I told him I don't think I can do that, but in those 2 and 3 days, I have tried to encapsulate a brief presentation. I hope it meets with the format and is pleasurable for the devotees. I will be as brief. I want to make a couple of observations as to sort of an overview of some of the things that I have heard to this point in listening to other presenters. And I would like to share with you a teaching tool, which I have used myself and have shared with others, and I found it to be extremely useful and flexible. So most of my talk, I'm going to be speaking along pedagogical terms. In particular, the decisions that I took in a project that I'm currently working on. And so I'm going to go through those, and in the end, I'm going to share with you a particular teaching tool which you can add to your instructional toolbox. I encourage you to give it a try. So far, those I've shared it with have found it to be a very helpful tool. It's science-based, research-based, and as times allow, I will address some of the underlying science and research that supports the tool and its reasoning. So that being said, I'm going to get straight into my presentation. And on the topic study guides, and some of the decisions I took from a really theoretical point of view on developing a study guide, which I'm working on. And with the understanding that with any content, with any group of students or target audiences, our task as educators is to consider these issues and balance them and make choices consciously based on a variety of factors. Mother Urmila spoke to the notion of philosophy of education, and there are a lot of things which I will speak on here, which come from my personal philosophy of education, and I am going to make it a point to do close reading of the paper that Urmila Devidasi wrote based on philosophy of education according to Srila Prabhupada's books. But according to my current philosophy of education, it is the learner which is at the center of the process. And it is our duty as educator to meet the student where they are. And that is, we have to be the proverbial adult in the room and be the one to go to the student as we are able to ascertain where they are. I think so often we see in some cultures that it is usually expected that the student must come to the teacher. And quite honestly, I think from a historical perspective, this is the school of thought that arose during the Victorian era, in which the educator was carrying out the white man's burden. And it was considered a great luxury for anyone to be in that classroom. And they were held subservient, and they should consider themselves lucky to get any form of education to begin with. We see this mode of education often in previous colonies. It still goes on today. It is one which I do not find, and nor does scientific research upon the affective environment within the classroom. It is not effective. It is outdated. It's the idea of a colonial overlord and not a sincere educator, in my opinion. According to my philosophy of education, the teacher actually has to feel that we are not the center. Instead, we are serving the students. We must determine their needs and alter our behavior, our instructional style, our methods of assessment to go to the place the student is. And in this way, it is not we who are the master, it is the students that we are serving. Understand that in many places, my particular teaching experience is in the United States. And in any classroom, practically speaking, in any part of the world, perhaps it may not be as culturally diverse as that of the United States, but in any classroom, anywhere in the world, the students come with varying levels of intelligence, different skill levels, and they learn in a variety of ways. Some learn by reading, some learn by visuals, some learn by tactile even, or interaction with others. So there are a host of different ways that students gain knowledge from the world. And it's part of our duty as educators to try to meet those needs of all of the learners, regardless of from whence they come. And this is an ideal. It's very difficult because students are very different from each other as individuals, also on a personal level, personalities. Ideally, we will tailor our instruction so that we match all students, including those that learn in ways different from our own. We all have the tendency, Atmavat Manyate Jagat, that we tend to see others through our own experiences. Our default assumption is that everything in the world and all others are like us. It's kind of like the default position. So we have to step out of that easy way of viewing the student and understand that they are not all like us. And we should be aware of that and attempt to individualize the instruction so that all of the students have their needs met. Obviously, content is highly varied within the narrow confines of education on the scriptures. It has particular characteristics. Also, there may be particular methods which are more effective in its delivery. But according to what we are teaching, we also have to consider the method. Let's say, for example, we're teaching how to bake a cake. Usually, the best way to learn to bake a cake is not reading about it. I mean, one might do that if it's in a well-written cookbook, but usually one learns by doing, by practical application. So the teacher needs to consider what the content is and determining which of a host of different methods that one should apply. Of course, sometimes our methods may be limited. For example, during the pandemic, we did not have the same range of teaching methodologies that we had previously. As they say in India, blind uncle is better than no uncle. So rather than have no instruction, we have resorted to the only methods that we have available, which has been mostly online. And to our surprise, it's actually worked pretty well in many cases. So the teacher decides, according to the content as well, which are the best methods or tools from the toolbox that match that content. So in the case of the project that I'm working on, I considered the specific content, the level of difficulty, and also the speaker of the original speaker to which I'm referring, and took that into consideration in terms of the outline which I built in making the study guide. And I am at the end of my 15 minutes, so I'm just going to skip right through. Possible to allow to make changes, and we should make them as appropriate. So we're balancing the content with the needs of the student. Hopefully that takes into account a wide range of student types. And we should also offer them a variety of ways, at least in my opinion, of developing or demonstrating their mastery. Because students do not always learn in the same way, we have to have alternative methods of determining their mastery. And it is not necessarily fair to say they all must be the same. I think actually the contrary is true. This concept has been borne out through modern educational research, or as Jeremy Bentham would advise, that we seek the greatest good for the greatest number. And this is consistent with our Vaishnava value of Samadarshana, that on some level, fairness is there, but it's at a much deeper level than the external aspects. And by doing that, it actually helps all students, because it is building the learning capacity of each student. We're actually stretching their capacity. They're all attempting to respond in a variety of modalities. And it actually has the effect of even those who have very common modes of learning, they learn from other students in ways that they might not have existed or have known existed. So it actually increases the learning capacity of all students. And this has been demonstrated by a variety of scientific studies performed in mostly European cultures. So this is the particular tool that I wanted to pass on to you, which is intellectually, I learned this as a member of the American Society for Curriculum Development. I will save extensive detail for the breakout session, because there's actually a lot of science. It's been extensively researched, including brain research. But in essence, there you have the students provide 4 different responses for key concepts. First of all, one has to identify what the key concepts are, and then one has them define it. And that definition must be in their own words, not merely a recitation from the dictionary or from the text. By placing it in their own words, they are forming connections to their previous learning, and this way makes the retrieval much stronger in the future. Providing an example and a non-example helps to distinguish what determines the key characteristic. For example, amongst furniture, we could say, in a way, a chair and a sofa are similar, but they're not the same. So if we're looking at sofa, we have to be able to say, well, what are those defining characteristics that make that particular item an example and a similar one a non-example? And as I mentioned before, students learn in different ways. for that reason, all of the students will also draw a picture that is their representation of the key concept. In so doing, what is happening is they are engaging both the verbal neocortex, they're engaging the portion of the brain where visual images are stored, and they're forming multiple connections so that that memory is easily retrievable from a variety of perspectives. Now, again, intellectual credit goes to the American Society for Curriculum Development. This particular model is actually copyrighted, and I need to make that notation. Now, the adaptation which I have taken for the study guide that I'm working on takes into account a little bit extra in addition to that. That's to say, as Prabhu spoke yesterday, we also engage in learning. So for that reason, I've incorporated, in essence, the same model as before to get the multimodality that has been, there's strong research that has shown this across a variety of cultures, environments, and student types. So maintaining the older version, but adding to it some things which are particular a bit more to our deep reflection on scriptures, especially those that are as esoteric as the one upon which I'm working. First of all, I'm asking the student to record environmental cues about what was going on at the moment that they were doing that particular concept. Let's say that concept may be Vatsalya Rasa as the term. So at the moment that they are doing it, is there anything that they noticed? Where were they at the time that they did that? For example, perhaps they were sitting in the temple room studying. And as they were working on the concept of Vatsalya Rasa, a flower garden fell off of Balaji. That is significant. Likewise, the last category, they needed to fill out at that moment, because it is quite often the case that our realizations deepen over time. So this is a place that they can record their immediate responses. And then as that realization deepens, they can return and enrich that understanding and record that and see their progress over time. So that is my presentation. And I don't know if there are any questions or not, but I'm turning it back over to the leader of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Chandra Prabhu, for sharing this topic today with us. We have the questions open, and so the question is, what are those 4 responses in summary?
There is a verbal response in their own words, and that's important because it, as a learning technique, you can consider it like you're hanging up a jacket. You have to have a hook to hang it on, or else it just falls to the floor. So you have them do a verbal response in their own vocabulary, their working vocabulary. And in this way, they are connecting to their prior knowledge, like hanging that coat on a hook. Otherwise, it's just like water off a duck's back. So there's that verbal response, and within their own working vocabulary, they provide an example of the concept. They provide a non-example. So let's go back to Vatsalya Rasa. An example could be the love expressed between Mother Yashoda and young Krishna. A non-example might be Krishna's relationship with someone in Dasya Rasa who serves him with a sense of awe and reverence. That's a non-example. And then a picture, whatever picture comes to mind. So it's that verbal example, non-example, and a visual to draw a picture of Mother Yashoda tying Krishna to the butter churn. And the two aspects which I've added to that is to have the devotee note anything that happens within that moment as they're doing it, to provide them an environmental cue. I had this discussion with my friend, Vatsalya Rasa Prabhu, maybe they're doing it jointly. So those sort of environmental cues to help them to remember back to their original contemplation. And then the final one is their realization over time. Anything they perhaps at that moment they think, oh, this sounds very cute. It reminds me of when I used to play with my Barbie doll, or their emotional response, any thoughts or memories that it invokes, which can be added to later on as their realization deepens.
Thank you, Chandra Prabhu. And I'd like to inform all the participants here that the ministry will be working with Chandra Prabhu in the coming few months. Our aspiration is, as Prabhu was just describing, that at some point in time, one's own experiences, realizations must bear fruit. And they can bear fruit for educators in them creating a curriculum. It is the aspiration of the ministry to have many a curriculi around Srila Prabhupada's books, big and small alike. And we would like to have a training in place where devotees, teachers, educators can be trained how to create such curriculum, how to create such study guides, principles around that. So in a few months, we will be publishing a training in collaboration with Chandra Prabhu. So we look forward to that collaboration, Chandra Prabhu, and I hope we'll have more of your association in the coming weeks together. So thank you for sharing today this topic about study guide and many experiences in your many years as a member of the American Society for Curriculum Development and so on and so forth. Thank you. Hare Krishna. So I would like to now, on that note, invite our next speaker, His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu. Radhika Raman Prabhu is, it's a good fortune, Radhika Raman Prabhu, to have your association today. Hare Krishna. Please accept my humble obeisances. And Prabhu has touched many lives with his own life. His life has been an inspiration, and he continues to inspire many people to engage in teaching, absorb themselves in scriptures. But it remains very important. Throughout the day of today's symposium, we talked about learning scriptures, teaching scriptures. And the second session started, the second presentation of our session today focused on what should be the mood and how it's very important to build context when we're with somebody and discuss scriptures. So Radhika Raman Prabhu scriptures in a contemporary context in the contemporary world. So I hand over to you, Radhikaraman Prabhu. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Tapan Mishra Prabhu, for that very kind introduction. Many thanks to you and to Balimardan Prabhu for inviting me to present today and facilitating this wonderful conference that's been going on. Without too much introduction, I'll just share my screen and you can see my presentation here. One moment. My topic is Applying Shastra to Contemporary Issues, a Historical Perspective. Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shlakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vancha Kalpaturibhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyai Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, as we study Shastra, I think one of the most, especially as we teach Shastra, not just to adults, but also to youth, I think one of the most important things that we can do is to teach and to learn how to apply Shastra in our contemporary times. And allow me to explain what that means. So throughout our history, our Gaudiya Vaishnava history, which is so illustrious with so many acharyas who have written hundreds of wonderful scriptures and commentaries, we find that throughout this history, our acharyas have done this very thing. They've applied Shastra to address the social concerns and the intellectual debates of their respective times. One of the most important ways in which the acharyas have done this is by writing, is through their commentaries on the scriptures, such as Srimad Bhagavatam, for example, and through Bhagavad Gita. So just to give us a little bit of historical perspective before I talk about how we can do this in contemporary times and what some strategies might be. So I want to start with the historical and then move more to our present day and see how we might apply it today. If we look at this historically, commentaries, or in Sanskrit, tika or bhashya, they typically perform several different functions. And the function of commentaries has actually been studied very thoroughly. And a few things really stand out as being common to the function of commentaries across the world, in fact. So this is not just in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, it's not just in Hinduism or India, it's actually something that's found across the world. There are certain things that unite commentators in terms of what they're trying to do. But if we look at the commentaries of our acharyas, we find that they perform many different functions. And I just want to highlight three key ones here. First of all, commentators provide a comprehensive explanation of Shastra. Now, by comprehensive, what I mean is that they're trying to explain the entire range of statements within a particular scripture. So you'll never find, for example, a commentator or bhashyakar saying, I'm commenting on Srimad Bhagavatam, but this section of Bhagavatam actually is pointless and there's nothing to say here, we can just leave it out. This doesn't occur. Commentators, bhashyakars, tikakaras are intent on providing an explanation that incorporates all aspects of the Shastra. Some are, of course, commented in more depth, some in less depth, but nevertheless, all of them form one integral whole. And that leads us to the second point, which is that the commentaries provide a consistent explanation of Shastra. Now, what I mean by this is that one of the most important functions of a commentator is to show us how a commentary, how a scripture holds together, how it is internally consistent and not internally contradictory. So if, for example, Krishna's Leela is described in different ways in different sections of the Bhagavatam, or even in different ways in different scriptures, then the commentator's role is to help explain how both of those apparently contradictory descriptions of the Leela can work together. Now, there's two different Varahas, for example. There's white and there's red. So which color is he? When does he appear? And so one of the common strategies that our acharyas use is to explain it as kalpa bheda, as the difference between different ages. So all of these descriptions are true, but they occur in different ways in different times, different ages. Creating consistency, right? And showing how each aspect, or in a more philosophical sense, we might say that when the acharyas are commenting on the Upanishads, for example, then some of the statements of the Upanishads are apparently describing how everything is one, the living entity and Brahman are one, they are not different. And other statements are describing that they are in fact different. And so it becomes the commentator's role, whether that commentator be from a Vaishnava Sampradaya or from a non-Vaishnava Sampradaya, it becomes the commentator's role to make sense of those inconsistencies or those apparent inconsistencies and create a philosophical system that shows how they all fit together nicely. And so for the Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharyas, for example, that consistent system would be Achintya Bheda Bheda, which helps us see how those different aspects of difference and non-difference come together. They can be held together without contradiction. And then the third and final one, which is the one I want to focus on for today's presentation, is that they present a relevant explanation of Shastra. Or if you want another C, then it can be a contemporary explanation of Shastra. So comprehensive, consistent, and contemporary. Now, what I mean by a relevant explanation of Shastra is that whenever an Acharya writes, they are conscious not just of what is being said in the scripture and what is the context in the time when the Shastra is describing, right? Whether it's Satyuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapara, Kali. So they're not only conscious of the Shastra's context, but they're also conscious of the context in which they are writing, the audience for whom they are writing, for example, and what the doubts, needs, questions, challenges might be for their own time. So this is one reason why the acharyas continue to write commentaries on the same scriptures, even though wonderful commentaries already exist that they quote from, that they give much honor to and they respect and everything. So previous acharyas have written commentaries, and yet acharyas will write further commentaries, not only because they have fresh realizations. Of course they do. The scripture is like unlimited. It's a well of spiritual realization, wisdom, but also because they have fresh concerns that they are addressing. One very nice example of this is Srila Baladev Vidyabhushana in the 18th century, who was faced with, we might say, a political challenge, but it was also a philosophical challenge. When the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, when so many of our deities, especially Govindadev, moved to Jaipur in Rajasthan, for the devotees moved them to protect these deities. Then at that time, the king of Jaipur, Jai Singh II, in his court, in his assembly of teachers, there was a debate that arose, a question that arose about the authenticity and authority of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, specifically focused on a couple of questions. Number one, they don't have a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, that there are only 4 authorized Vaishnava Sampradayas, and they don't belong to any one of them, and they don't follow any one of those commentaries. And secondly, that Radha and Krishna, as in Radha Govinda, should not be worshipped together because they are unmarried, and that is improper. So Baladev Vidyabhushana, of course, took the same philosophy, the same Siddhanta, but specifically addressed in his commentary on Vedanta Sutra, that famous commentary called Govinda Bhashya, that commentary that he credited to Lord Govinda himself for inspiring. That in that commentary, he writes, he addresses these points particularly strongly and clearly, particularly the function of Srimati Radharani as the eternal energy of the Lord. So I could give many examples of this sort of thing from Srila Jiva Goswami's writings, for example. But given the limitation on time, let me just give a couple of examples from our own dear spiritual master, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who in his own commentaries and writings demonstrates this sharp focus on the contemporary issues and challenges of our own time. From things like his focus on the dominant philosophies of his time, of our time, namely that of science and scientism and Darwinism and so on. One very nice example of this is Srila Prabhupada's book, Easy Journey to Higher Planets, where he writes about, he addresses especially the concern that was prevalent at that time in the mid-20th century, where the world was rushing to create various kinds of aircraft or spacecraft to go into outer space, to get to the moon and to other planets. And Srila Prabhupada addresses that concern directly in this book, Easy Journey to Other Planets. What is the best and easiest way to get to other planets? And there he uses language from science at that time. He talks about matter and antimatter, for example, to discuss the difference between the soul and the body. So same eternal principles, same Siddhanta about the eternality of the soul, and yet using language and addressing a context that is very much contemporary during that time, during Srila Prabhupada's time. Like this, the Acharyas show us how we can take what is eternal truth and apply it in a comprehensive, consistent, but especially relevant way to our own times. So, Shastric study in our own times then is even more effective when we can learn how to apply it to two different elements of our time. Okay? And I've divided them here into contemporary social realities and contemporary intellectual philosophies. In terms of contemporary social realities, we're talking about here in terms of the challenges and struggles that our society in our present day faces. So one of the big ones, for example, that is really swept the world in terms of concern and attention is ecology or the environment. Having taught in the university now for a good 15 years, I can say that one of the most important concerns that students have today when they study religions or they study about religions is how does this religious tradition address the challenges of the environment, the destruction of the earth that human beings have helped to facilitate. And they're extremely concerned about this practical element. And so it behooves us, for example, as those who study and teach Shastra, to be able to take from scripture what is relevant to this concern and show how a spiritual solution, how the Shastras, particularly Srimad Bhagavatam, can help us address these concerns in a very practical and yet very spiritual way. So there's the contemporary social concerns, And, you know, there are so many. There's environmental and interreligious conflicts and family relationships, mental health concerns, gender relationships, and so on. And then there's the contemporary intellectual philosophies of our time. One of the most important that Srila Prabhupada addressed regularly was the idea of scientism or physicalism, the idea that everything in this world can be explained purely as a physical phenomena and we can understand it through the means of the five senses. And there's nothing beyond the grasp of those five senses. This is not a scientific claim. It's a claim about science that is really in the realm of faith or belief, scientism. But then there's so many others. One of the big ones is Post-Modernism, which basically is the idea that truth is relative, that if there is a truth, there's no truth with a capital T, no eternal absolute truth, that your truth is true for you and my truth is true for me. Truth is completely determined by one's social and historical context. And this is the source of so many ideas. When you're on the street or you're talking to someone and people say, what's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me, that sort of thing. Now, not all intellectual philosophies are our opponents, or they need to be defeated or argued. It's important to recognize that we have important partners as well in this intellectual discussion. And what's really fascinating is that that our acharyas recognize such partners, and they seek to both employ their arguments and also work with them. So one wonderful example that I find is fascinating is when Srila Jiva Goswami in his Paramatma Sandarbha, he offers a commentary on the first 5 sutras of the Vedanta Sutra based on Srimad Bhagavatam. And his commentary on the sutra Shastra Yonitvat, he offers 2 different explanations. One explanation is consistent with the commentary of Srila Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya. But one of his explanations is consistent with the explanation given by Shankaracharya in his commentary on his Sharirika Bhashya on Vedanta Sutra. Now, of course, Shankaracharya's philosophy, Jiva Goswami does not accept. In fact, he argues quite strongly against it in the Sandarbhas. And yet, when he sees something of value in Shankaracharya's commentary, he not only accepts it, but employs it and repeats it. And this is not just one example, but in multiple cases in the Sandarbhas, Srila Jiva Goswami does so. He will quote some aspect of Sharirika Bhashya by Shankaracharya and say, although I do not agree with the conclusion that Shankaracharya gives here, his method is very useful. And so let us use his method and apply it here for the point we're trying to make regarding Srimad Bhagavatam. So it's important that we see where our partners are, because we live in a world where the influence of Kali is very, very strong. Right. And so when it comes to other religious traditions, for example, it's nice to see where that cooperation can take place and where we are partners in a joint effort to push back the effects of materialism and atheism in this world. So seeking and working in partners is really, really helpful. But of course, first we have to start with understanding what the issues of our time are. The nature of this world is that everything is changing over the course of time. And so the concerns that people have, the issues and challenges of our time, they change over every generation. And it becomes not only helpful, but necessary. It becomes the duty of every generation of Vaishnavas to understand the issues of our time and to apply the philosophy in response to those issues, to comment upon them in line with the eternal Siddhanta given by our acharyas. So higher education, as in the university context, can provide a very nice context for what those issues are and how to study them. I mention this in particular because there is not just a theoretical concern here, but a very practical one as well, which is that our younger generation, our youth, I would say, the vast majority of them are going to enter higher education. And given the paucity of higher education institutions within our movement, the vast majority of these students will take higher education classes to become whatever their profession might be, doctors, lawyers, businessmen, professors. They're going to go to secular universities to study. And so the issues, the intellectual issues that I mentioned, whether it be Scientism or Post-Modernism or different kinds of religious intellectual philosophies, they will face these issues. They will face these issues. They will hear them. They will debate them, and they will engage with them. So why not help them address these philosophical issues right from the start, right from their youth, from their childhood, of course, in a way that is appropriate to their intellectual capacity. But it becomes so important that we help them see not only the world of the Bhagavatam, but the intellectual world that they're going to face as they grow up, and help them see how the Bhagavatam responds to, engages with, in some cases refutes the philosophical ideas, the intellectual ideas that they are going to face sooner or later. And this is why when we study Shastra, it's so important to practice this type of engagement by helping our children and our adults, of course, apply whatever we read to the questions of our time and ask ourselves, how does the Bhagavatam address these questions? Including such questions in study guides and encouraging our students to respond to them. If they are faced with the idea that truth is relative, is there truth to that idea? Can they respond to that? In some ways, yes, truth in the material world is relative. Time is relative. And yet underlying all that is an eternal truth. Why? How can we defend that? Such questions are crucial. If we want our children and our youth to maintain their faith in Shastra as they grow up and as their intellectual capacities become sharper, we want them to maintain their Shraddha, their understanding, and to deepen it, we have to guide them in how they can address such concerns. One very nice way to do so is by studying Shastra thematically. It makes a wonderful project, for example, to go through Srimad Bhagavatam and ask ourselves, what resources does Srimad Bhagavatam give us to address, for example, the environmental concerns of our time? And we'll find that there is unlimited material there. There's one wonderful purport in the 7th canto where Srila Prabhupada describes the importance of protecting trees and identifies the cutting down of trees as a demonic quality, exemplified by Hiranyakashipu himself. So there's so much there, right? But just to point out that this is a crucial concern, not just in a theoretical sense, not just for the continuation of our sampradaya, which is, of course, a very important concern, but even for something very practical, such as helping our children maintain their identity as devotees and as they face the world and all the concerns that the world brings to our table, and how can Shastra address those concerns as it has been doing for thousands of years. Thank you all so much for your attention, for giving me this opportunity to say a few words on this topic. I'm very, very happy. I don't know whether we have any time left. It doesn't seem so.
We've almost ended. We've come to the end of the session, but there are a few questions. So I would definitely like to take one question if you can, Prabhu.
Yes.
It appears that there are ample opportunities meeting the intellectual needs of today's society. how do you see future of Vedic research institutions and centers in our organization? Here I feel it seems that our organization here refers to ISKCON.
Yes. So that's a wonderful question. Thank you, Tapan Mishra Prabhu, for bringing it up. And thank you to whoever asked the question. Actually,
Ramacharya Prabhu in the United States.
Thank you, Namacharya Prabhu. So this is actually, it's a very crucial point. If we look at any religious institution, and I mean here institution not just in the sense of sampradaya, but in terms of an actual organization as a legal institution, if we look at any institution, religious institution that has survived beyond a few decades, beyond a century even, it is because they have developed and cultivated their own educational research institutions. Look at the Catholic Church, for example. The Catholic Church has dozens of universities, pontifical universities that are directly controlled by the Vatican, and other universities that are not directly controlled by the Vatican, but are aligned with the Catholic Church. Many of them founded here in the United States, for example. And these universities provide scholarship, thinking, and exactly the sort of application of Shastra that I have been describing. The reason for that is this sort of application can be thought through, should be thought through by every devotee, but to do it systematically and to do it in a way that other intellectual groups in the world will take seriously, it requires a lot of thought, a lot of training, and the proper environment, the proper atmosphere. And so this is Srila Prabhupada's desire. I hope it's in the future of our movement to create one, two, many universities where devotees can, while remaining faithful in their sadhana, their practice, and their allegiance to Siddhanta, can at the same time open up our philosophy to the world and engage with it in the way that there were such educational institutions in the time of the Goswamis and for many generations. Let there be such educational institutions in our own time, addressing our own intellectual challenges.
Thank you, Prabhu. And we're hopeful now that in the coming years, soon we will be setting up the foundation for the Mayapur University here in Sridham, Mayapur. And we're working with the Bhaktivedanta Research Center and the team in Mumbai to take that forward. We remain hopeful that you will guide us, assist us, help us in that effort, as you have also, as I know, in the effort in Mumbai. So thank you, Prabhu, for joining us. Before you leave, I want to just share a comment. We need not respond to it, but it's a comment from Parabhakti Prabhu in Italy, who says, in spreading Krishna consciousness, we mostly contact adults where andragogy and not pedagogy seems the more appropriate way to teach them in the way to get better results. But I saw that very rarely our teachers use it or even know what the difference in this two system. And the next question is, Hare Krishna Prabhuji, in India, government universities do not teach our Shastra. Any action taken in that direction to persuade them to adopt our Shastra in university? I think Prabhu answered that. Let's make our own universities. It's a lofty aim, but we have to start small. And even if we can establish one faculty, two faculty, develop it from there, there's a very high chance we will be able to get to university. But if we make that beginning, Krishna will provide. Thank you, Prabhu. Very grateful to have your association today and look forward to having it in the future as well. We are now coming to the end of this session, and there is a very important announcement. In today's session throughout the day, we focused on Shastric education. And clearly we focus on the aspect of more teachers, developing institutes, etc., etc. But if you recall, in one of these sessions today, we talked about that at the end of all of this, there is a very, very serious need for it to help us as individual practitioners of bhakti. So the morning session tomorrow, we are going to have 4 speakers, and we are going to focus. There needs to be a development of consciousness for all of us, whichever stage we are in, whether we are a teacher or a student. But the most important name of development of consciousness must happen. So we have tomorrow, right in the morning, we will talk about levels of consciousness with Leela Purushottam Prabhu. Then we will, from India, from Australia, we'll have Krishnendu Prabhu, who will talk about from the earlier on age of Kumaram to Yauvanam, how consciousness must develop, how to adopt it or how to apply it, especially at the age of adolescence. Then we're going to take 2 particular, ashram, varna, like that. We're going to talk about Vanaprastha ashram, going from adolescence, Grihastha ashram, then Vanaprastha ashram. We have Devaki Mataji who will come and speak to us about that, how to apply it there. And then we're also going to touch upon a topic, which is, what about sannyasis and gurus? Do they also require a preparation? So please join us tomorrow morning for this session of the symposium. And then the last session will be held on a very important topic, which is the importance of reading Prabhupada's books. And we have in the session in the evening, Vaisheshika Prabhu, Shesha Prabhu and myself will be addressing that topic, and also Mukundan Anand Prabhu, where we'll share on how we are actually creating a project now. We've created a project where all of Srila Prabhupada's small books, how we're going to creating a curriculum, questions on all of Srila Prabhupada's small books. So that's 19,000 paragraphs. And we hope in the next year or so to have a multiple choice question on every single paragraph. So just a sneak peek into what's coming tomorrow. Please do join us. Please invite your friends and fellow educators around the world also to do the same. We will, at the end of this session, also provide a link for a post-symposium informal networking. So I'm going to post that link now. And anybody who would like to carry on that informal discussion can join us there for that conversation. And in that conversation, if you have some questions also with respect to the ministry, then we can try and address them there. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to your association tomorrow. I'm posting the link now, and you can, once you click on the link, you can join us in the post-symposium networking session, which I encourage all of you to join, get to know each other, get introduced to each other. So thank you, and look forward to your association again, 5:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. Bali Mardhan Prabhu, any other announcement?
No, Prabhu, just Hare Krishna. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and his transcendental books. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavnebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Thank you, everyone.
Prabhupada ki jai.